Hello, and welcome to the BCN and Friends podcast, where we have real conversations about learning, leadership, and the lived experiences of nurses and healthcare professionals across the emergency spectrum. Each episode, we sit down with thought leaders, BCN certification holders, and industry experts who share their stories, their insights, and the challenges that shape their work. Our mission is simple: to amplify the voices of those making a difference every day, because your experiences drive progress, inspire others, and shape the future of nursing. We're here to honor that in every episode. Sometimes funny, sometimes serious, and always valuable. This is BCN and Friends, and we're so glad you're here.
In this episode, we're joined by Marilyn McCullum for a thoughtful conversation on the art and responsibility of nursing, clinical documentation, and the deeper stories captured within the healthcare record. Together, we explore how what we write reflects not only clinical care, but accountability, ethics, and the human experience behind every patient interaction. Marilyn shares insights shaped by research, practice, and creativity, offering a perspective that reminds us the first pulse we take is our own. This episode is titled "The Pulse Within the Pages of Healthcare."
I'm Holly Briggs, a professional development specialist at BCN and one of your hosts for today. I'm joined by my co-host, Michael Dexter, our Director of Professional Development. Hi, Michael.
Hello, Holly.
It's great to have you with us. And again, this episode, we are going to explore the real-world innovation and decision-making that shape how emergency care is delivered. It's often in fast-moving, high-pressure environments. And to help us navigate that space, we're joined by Marilyn McCullum, an experienced emergency nurse, educator, and legal nurse consultant with deep expertise in triage, ED redesign, and clinical documentation. Michael, could you please introduce us to our BCN friend, Marilyn?
I would be happy to, but first I wanted to say this is a unique podcast recorded over 2 days simultaneously. We're recording in the afternoon in one time zone and the morning in another. Marilyn McCullum is an experienced emergency nurse with over 15 years in high acuity emergency and trauma care across the United States, triple board certified in emergency, pediatric, and trauma nursing. She's a recognized educator and speaker with expertise in triage, emergency department operations, and clinical documentation. Marilyn is also a published author that dedicated to improving patient flow and quality of care. Marilyn, welcome to the BCN and Friends podcast. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Hi, Michael. Hi, Holly. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. We appreciate you being here, and we're looking forward to diving into a little bit more about you.
Yeah, well, I must say that the scheduling of this episode, I literally had to Google what's the time difference between New Zealand and US Central Time, and trying to coordinate getting with you when you wouldn't be exhausted and we wouldn't be asleep. And all that to say, this is a very special episode simply because you have so many different components to your career and background that we are going to dive into. So I guess the best way to start this off is just to have you walk us a little bit through your career path, and then what made you decide to branch out from kind of the bedside clinical side to quality improvement and then also legal nursing.
Well, I started in my childhood and adolescent years swearing that I was not going to be a nurse because I was raised by a nurse and my grandmother was a nurse, aunts were nurses, and I just knew that was absolutely not something that I wanted to do. And then I wound up in the emergency department as a secretary and figured out that there's different types of nursing. And I really fell in love with the emergency department because no 2 days are ever the same. And so I decided to pursue nursing school. I graduated in 2011, started working as a nurse in a small community hospital in Indiana. I made my way across the bridge to Kentucky to a trauma center, and then decided to branch out and start traveling. And so I went from North Carolina all the way over to California and eventually settled down in California for a while. Spent the last decade working in California, and over that time frame, I started working as a legal nurse consultant. I went to a conference because I was lucky enough to have an employer that would pay for conferences. And so I went to a conference back in Kentucky where my family was, just to see my family. It was a legal nurse consulting conference. And I walked in and I was very early because I was so nervous that I would be late. So I was absurdly early and sat down at an empty table and waited for everybody else to show up. And it ends up that the people that sat with me were the president, the vice president, and treasurer of the AALNC. And so they were super supportive, non-judgmental. I told them, frankly, yeah, I know nothing about legal nurse consulting, but I'm interested in learning more. And it really opened my eyes. And then through those connections is how I started working as a nurse expert. And as I started working as a nurse expert, I started noticing a lot of the systems behind the patient care. As bedside nurses, we see a lot of frustrations, and a lot of those frustrations that we experience aren't necessarily because our coworkers aren't working hard enough or our doctors aren't working hard enough. They're because of workflow problems, maybe some communication problems, maybe process problems. And so then in California, when I went back to working as a staff nurse, I became involved with education within that department and started working with triage education, some department flow, and then getting into a bit of quality improvement because I wanted to understand how we can kind of work together as clinical nurses with administration to make things work better for both patients and our staff.
You've given us a lot, and I want to get back to the legal nurse part in just a little bit. But I've been at multiple facilities where that whole front end process is a problem, and both Holly and I work on both regional and state, national levels with different emergency nursing work groups to try to improve the profession. And this is like a consistent problem over and over. And so I've been in some facilities where they do have, like a fast track area. I've been in other facilities where they have a provider in triage that will try to, as the term goes, treat and street some of these individuals that may not need a full workup. There's other models where people will have an open room concept with chairs. So,
Mm.
you've been in a lot of different areas. You've written articles on redesigning ED flow. So, can you dive into that part a little bit more on the whole triage to bed model, the ways that you've seen different people effectively impact patient flow, especially in that initial component of intake to the ED? I feel like a lot of departments, and this is another subject, but a lot of departments that do intake well will often deal with outflow and they can't get patients admitted to the floor so there's so many different bottlenecks, but maybe you could just dive into that whole front end redesign a little bit more and talk about rethinking that patient journey from when they arrive to how that care is then shifted based on their needs.
You're right. There are any number of bottlenecks that can be present in any given emergency department. And it does vary facility to facility. And I think that's why I appreciate so much the travel nurse experience that I had. I think I'm now on my 15th facility emergency department that I've worked in. And so I'm blessed to have been able to see a lot of different workflows over the past 15 years. And I kind of started to figure out what works, what doesn't work, and to identify a few of those bottlenecks. One thing that I've noticed kind of just across the board, we tend to, as emergency nurses, we tend to triage quickly, but then it stops. So we do, as the triage nurses, we do what we're supposed to do, and we get the patient in the computer and in the system, and then the care doesn't start. We wait because we are so trained and ingrained on having a bed, an assigned bed for care to start. And the models that I have seen work actually decouple the care that the patient receives from an actual physical bed. So you can start care earlier. You don't need a physical bed in order to start interventions such as phlebotomy, any imaging, PO medications. And one of the more successful flows that I've seen uses, and it's the one that I read the article about that you were referring to, uses something called portal rooms. And so they have, 3 to 4 different portal room areas. And it is the expectation in that emergency department that unless they're ESI ones or very critically ill, they will be seen in a portal room by the doctor. And so these doctors know to go in very quickly, evaluate those patients. They do the full evaluation right there. It's not just a brief provider and triage kind of encounter. They do the full evaluation in the portal room, and then they come out to a dedicated portal nurse and say, okay, this patient needs blood, labs, PO medication, and then they can go out to the lobby to wait. Because a lot of our emergency department patients, they have the ability to go back out to the lobby to wait. In other departments or another facility, they would still be waiting, but without having received that care. And so what we're trying to do is give them that care. Yes, they may still be sitting out in the lobby, but at least they've had the blood drawn, they've had the imaging done, and the doctor has done their evaluation, and their analgesia, antiemetics, what have you, are beginning to work. Another thing that we did, because then the doctors were like, okay, can we go back and reassess, reevaluate our patients without taking them back to a portal room? Because that's supposed to be the entry point, not the exit point. And so we created a chairs area, and we had about, depending on how busy, anywhere between 4 to 6 chairs. The providers or the doctors would bring their patients back to the chairs area, discuss their results with them. And a good majority of the time, they would get discharged from that chair area. So they never actually made it back into the main emergency department. I have seen quite a bit about upright flow models and provider and triage models. And the thing that I'm really trying to encompass is including those ESI2s. Because a lot of the current models that I see, they don't include ESI2s or a more critical time-sensitive patient. They're not one, they don't need to go to bed right away, but they do need to be seen sooner rather than later. And in the model that I've worked on and that I've implemented in another emergency department after seeing it initially work out, we include ESI2s, and a lot of times we can get them seen, evaluated, and maybe the provider is okay with them waiting in the lobby. Maybe they're too for severe pain and distress, and maybe some analgesia and some emotional reassurance will help. Other times, the provider may say, "Oh no, this patient needs a room," and at that point, that's when they get assigned a bed into the main emergency department. We found, because we implemented the portal rooms first, and it worked great. But then we realized our 4s and 5s who don't fit in this portal flow, because we're constantly getting patients, right? And so you go by acuity. Our 4s and 5s kept waiting. And so what we ended up doing, because our fast track ended up, after COVID, ended up full with boarders pretty consistently. And so now we no longer have fast track in this department. And so what we did was we converted old office space into informal patient treatment areas. That's where we would see our ESI 4s and 5s. And the flow for them was fairly similar. If it required anything like splinting or any sort of suturing, then we would try to get them into one of the available fast track beds that we would hopefully have open. Otherwise, we would see them, give them their PO medication, get their x-rays ordered, and then they also go back out to the lobby. So our lobby stayed fairly full, just like most emergency departments. However, the majority of our patients had been seen and the care had already been started.
There's so many mental, almost like a mental gymnastics that has to happen in order for people to like embrace this new concept. And I don't mean just for like department staff, because that in and of itself like can often be challenging when you're trying to institute something new and people have been working like a certain way, a certain flow for many years. And it's kind of like we love change, but we don't want to do it mindset. Not that I've worked in nursing long enough to know that that is kind of how it goes. But there's also then, so you have to overcome that, which is challenging, but then you also have to overcome the mindset of patients who have been used. Maybe this is the hospital they've always gone to, and so you're now introducing a new idea and a new flow to what they have grown accustomed to, or what they've seen, on TV or whatever it might be. So their expectation is that I'm going to go to a private room and a private space where I'm going to be privately seen, like you have this concept that a patient's expectations will look like similar to what maybe they would get in the clinic setting, right? When you go see maybe your primary care or another specialty doctor. And obviously, we all on this recording have worked in emergency medicine to know that like emergency care can happen in almost any space. We do it pretty well, pretty much anywhere. I've definitely given care in a chair, on a stool, sometimes on the floor. There have been lots and lots of moments where I'm like, we can almost do anything almost anywhere. And so is it ideal? Is it always the best version of it? Absolutely not. But to your point, and I think what you're really shooting for is that when a person comes into the emergency department, their expectation is that they will be taken care of. And when you triage somebody and put them right back in the lobby and don't do anything, then yes, the triage has happened. You are correct. And I think to your point, we do that pretty well. But if you don't initiate some type of care, then you're not meeting kind of like that most basic expectation. And if COVID taught me nothing, it was that people will learn to accept care almost anywhere. Like we were doing a lot of care in hallways, in back hallways, in a sectioned off portion of the hospital, in a back area. And people like, they were like, oh, this is what we do. I'm like, yes, you're going to go out this door. You're going to go down the sidewalk here and you're going to enter that other door back there. And that's where they're going to see you. And guess what? People were like, oh, okay. Like it kind
I
of
think adapt.
yes, 100%. As long as we seemed like we know what we're doing and we're going to get you care and we're going to get you seen, they began to accept it as like, oh yeah, this is the new normal. And so I hope that anyone listening to this who feels like those immediate challenges would be super difficult to overcome, it's not going to be without resistance. Let's go ahead and say that. There will be some resistance to any change initiated, but if let's say that we have a staff member, ED team member, like listening, and they were like, man, it'd be great to change our entire front end and put in a different model, but we don't have the money, we don't have the staff, we don't have the space, all of these maybe even physical or financial barriers. But is there something that you could suggest or plant the seed of an idea that could be kind of low cost, highly practical, of one front end change that maybe you would say, hey, you could at least start here?
Yeah. So I think the biggest gain that somebody looking and kind of pondering this would be to ask themselves, what can we safely do now within our department? And so sometimes that means that you do have spare office space that you can convert and make into a portal space, which is great. Other times that's not possible, it's not feasible. And then you may start looking at different interventions such as standing orders. Sometimes the provider in triage, it can help get the lower ESIs, like the 4s and the 5s, kind of through, because they do tend to sit stagnant, especially in a busy emergency department where you have high acuity. Those 4s and 5s, they just kind of get left out into the lobby and they wait for quite some time. Another thing that we could look at, or somebody could look at, is maybe creating a space. And it could be something as simple as a space within the triage area itself where you just drag a gurney in, or even a small cot, just to get those ECGs, EKGs done. And maybe those rapid blood tests. You have standing orders for chest pain, short of breath, abdominal pain. We all know what's going to be ordered with those patients. And so you get the providers on board, you get the nurses on board, administration, you work up a good set of standing order protocols, and then you educate your nurses on how to utilize those. Most of the time, the triage nurses, they're very experienced. They tend to have at minimum a year before in that department before they start working out in triage. And so they should have a good feel for how that department runs and what tests tend to be ordered. And if standing orders, protocols could be initiated even without the real estate change, that can help drive a little bit faster care. But you're right, there's always going to be resistance with any sort of change, but people do adapt, and not just the patients, the staff too. Patient perception, when we start getting them seen faster, it improved. Even though we were telling them, you don't get a bed, we're going to send you back out to the lobby. But after we do these things for you, their perception was better than triaging them and then saying, I'm sorry, you're going to wait at least 3 hours to see a doctor. So we saw an improvement with our patient satisfaction scores, and then we also saw an improvement with nursing retention because our portal nurses all of a sudden felt more empowered and felt that they were there doing what we all wake up to do, which is we're here to take care of patients. We're not here to just triage and sit on them and listen to complaints all day. We're here to take care of these patients and nurse. And so when we're put into situations where we're able to flourish like that, we saw a decrease in nurse burnout and an increase in nurse retention, as well as an increase in the patient satisfaction. So all in all, it was a win. And I'm working currently on another department getting this kind of installed. And the biggest thing is just getting everybody on board with it, because it is such a shift from the traditional mindset. Again, you don't need a bed to start care, and that mindset just has to go because we no longer have the real estate to work with.
Absolutely. You talked about retention and staff and looking at the models, and it reminded me we had a time when we had opened up a new fast track area, and so there was like 10 new fast track beds. We had several chairs and things, and so the fast track area was staffed well, had a lot of resources available, but we had the exact opposite of what you mentioned earlier about the fours and fives waiting for a long time. Those would be sent to fast track, and then we ended up with all these level threes that were waiting for a long time because the ED was full and boarding. And so then it actually became more of this ethical question of these people are sicker. We've documented that they're sicker, but yet all these that are less acute are getting seen, treated, and sent home much faster through this other area that's attached to the ED, and we're just allowing these more acute patients to sit for hours and hours with nothing being done. And so that was a little bit of the opposite problem that you were mentioning earlier, in that when you don't have a solution and you're trying to make better solutions for patients, but then you end up realizing, hey, this is not what we intended, or this is worse, or patients are waiting longer, then you do have the staff that are looking at it going like, what am I doing here? Why am I doing this? This isn't right. This isn't fair for people that are coming here looking for care. And then it gets into the legal aspect as well, which is my perfect segue what I asked you earlier about getting back to legal, because I know if we're going to document that somebody is sick or is critically ill, then we have to also show what we did to support their care and to improve their outcomes and those things. And so whether it's in triage or whether it's other areas of the ED, that plays into it a lot as well, is people going, hey, we documented that they were a level three or a level two, but then we did nothing for an hour or two, and these other
Exactly.
people. And so that becomes hard as well. But I've actually been connected with you on LinkedIn for a while, and you share a lot of documentation stories and examples of different things. And so I was curious if you could share some of that and maybe even include a little bit of triage documentation off the top of your head if you have some things there. But you have this lens of working in the ED, being very passionate about improving flow and outcomes in triage, but also looking at it from that legal nurse side ever since sitting in that room by yourself for a while before the conference started. So what is some advice that you would give to people and insight to professionals or those nurses that may say, I feel a little conflicted with my, the ethics of what I'm doing, or I don't know if I'm documenting appropriately. What are some of the core takeaways that you would give to people that are in the emergency space? They need to work swiftly, but they need to document appropriately as well.
I have lots of things, as you know, to say about documentation. The first thing that I always say with documentation is throw something personal in there. Most places have electronic health records, which is fine. It's great. It's fast. And it's easy to just click through everything. But I can tell you, after reading through hundreds of depositions, you are not going to remember that patient in 4 years. What I did as a bedside nurse is when I see a patient, I go through all of the required documentation. Most of it's just click and point stuff anyway, right? But then I go and I write a narrative. I try to write something personal about that patient that hopefully it'll jog my memory if anything ever happens. I try always to do a GCS. It may not be required documentation like the suicide screening and the fall score and everything, but a GCS tells so much, an initial GCS. It's one of the things that I look for when I'm on the back end reading through a lot of these documentations where all of a sudden there's clinical deterioration. I want to know how they presented at first. And so GCS tells me a lot. Another thing that I do strongly recommend, which may be not what's commonly taught, is to document your thought process. Not in depth, but tell me why something happened. So, for example, Michael, you were just talking about, okay, yeah, we triaged a bunch of these ESI 2s and 3s, but they've been sitting in the waiting room for the last 3 hours. Tell me why. Tell me a reassessment from the triage nurse or the waiting room nurse standpoint. Put something in that chart that when I'm reading it, it makes me think, oh, they didn't forget about this patient. Obviously, working in an emergency department, I know the chart may not reflect exactly what was going on. We can't chart everything, right? You do need to chart pertinent things, such as reassessments. You also need to chart pertinent communication. One of the biggest issues that I see as a nurse expert is communication failures. I get asked frequently when I do depositions, it's impossible to document every conversation, right? And my answer is yes, it's impossible to document every conversation that I have with a colleague about every one of my patients. However, pertinent conversations are important. For example, if I bring up a concern and it's not addressed by that provider, and I feel I need to maybe initiate the chain of command or something, I need to see that in the documentation because the nurse may initiate the chain of command. They may talk to their charge nurse about it, but if they don't put it in the medical record, the attorneys, the paralegals, the experts like me who are reading through it, we have no idea. And these sort of things, they happen frequently. And if you get called into deposition, you may not remember that particular patient. And so it's really important to document kind of those abnormal communication instances and also to document pertinent normals. So if you have a patient who passed out because they were dizzy, but they're not dizzy now, please document that they're not dizzy now. You need to address it because I know a lot of our emergency departments do focused assessments, which look really bare bones on the back end. But do please document pertinent normals because then I at least know that you addressed it.
I think on one of those things, I just wanted to get some clarification. You mentioned documenting provider communication. And one of those things that I think has been hard, and I've been guilty of it myself, just being honest, is you don't want to throw somebody under the bus, but you do want to document what happened. And I think that that's been one of the things that I've seen that's been hard for people sometimes is like, I told so and so, and they told me to, get out of here, I don't care, versus provider informed, no new orders at this time, etc. But in some of the charts that you've reviewed, have you seen any of those things where you're just shaking your head going, I can't believe they documented that? Or conversely, they documented so well, it was so professional, etc., with that communication aspect of it?
Yeah, there's one. I bring it up nearly every time I talk about documentation. This wonderful nurse, they had a boarder in the emergency department, and I don't recall exactly what was going on, but clinical deterioration of some sort was happening. And so the nurse called the admitting doctor, and said, "Hey, so the vital signs at this point were normal, and now he's hypotensive and tachycardic." And then he documented by SBAR, which was great because you never see an emergency nurse document by SBAR. And so he documented, this is the situation, this is how the patient was initially, and what's changed on my assessment. I recommend that you come and evaluate the patient. And then he documented that Dr. So and so stated he was unable to come by at that time and to continue monitoring the patient. And the nurse did that a good 3 to 4 times that he had contacted this doctor. I don't know if he contacted the doctor more than those times because, yeah, sometimes there are things that we don't document. Maybe he called and got hung up on it. Things happen, right? But I really appreciated his documentation, and I found that I could defend him quite well, not only in my written report, but also in deposition, to say, no, this nurse did everything he could to get this doctor at the bedside. Short of grabbing their hand and dragging them in the room, there is a limit. So he did, I think, everything at his disposal that he could to prevent a bad outcome. Unfortunately, it ended up on my desk as an expert, so obviously there was a bad outcome, but the nurse did a wonderful job in trying to prevent that. And his documentation reflected it. And I appreciate documentation like that because I don't think anybody wakes up and says, I'm going to go to work and hurt people today. I'm going to go to work and neglect people. We don't do that. We become nurses because we want to help people. And things may happen. Bad outcomes happen. People get sicker. People die. And that doesn't necessarily mean that the nurse did anything wrong. But if you can document well and accurately and timely, then that gives experts like me a better shot at defending you.
So many good points in what you said. And I love that you were able to kind of give us like that real world example of a nurse doing it well. Because I think there is something to be said for professionalism in documentation. You can lay it out and paint a picture of what happened, and you can still keep it clinical, you can still keep it professional, you can still keep it real, like this is really what happened, but you can do it in a way that you're not trying to bias someone towards like, oh, that they really screwed up here. You can just, hey, I did my part. I know my role. I know what my part of the team is to do, and I can't do your job. I can try to help you as much as possible, but I can't fill your role. And I think other members of the team, you have to be willing to take accountability if you don't do what you are supposed to do for that patient, if you don't meet the need, like you have to take accountability for that. And again, that's your professional responsibility. My professional responsibility is to do my job as a nurse and to show up ready to do that every single time, and to not be the barrier that's standing between the flow of communication. Like I need to reassess my patients, and I need to get new vitals on patients, and I need to
Yes.
perform the orders and come back and make sure that my patients are improving. That's my part to play. That's my role to play as part of their healthcare team. I'm not playing every position on the field. That's just not the way it works. You
Yeah.
gotta have like a team here to do all of that. And I think that there is such a need for continual reminders and educations, offerings to and encouragement, really, to keep your documentation professional, but to not be afraid of documenting those things that really happen, because you may not remember that patient, and litigation takes a while. Like it's not like something bad happens and then tomorrow you're going to get called to court. Like that's not how it happens. It takes a long time. And so sometimes I wouldn't remember my patients like day to day, and somebody'd be like, you took care of me last week, and I'm like, probably did. We don't remember it, and that's short of a time span. And so I really liked your advice of just trying to make something memorable, something that might jog your memory for that patient or that situation. So lots of really great advice. I appreciate you breaking it down. I know you probably could spend an hour talking about. So
Well, absolutely.
so we won't make you stay up that late. But I did want to ask, because we did mention the time zone difference, that you're now in New Zealand. You've practiced in the US across, high acuity EDs, trauma, all that in the US, and now you're in New Zealand. I have jokingly said, and I feel like most nurses would say that is probably true, that nursing is nursing anywhere. If you're a nurse, you can probably nurse wherever it is that your feet land you. All that to say, every environment is different. Every hospital is different. Every organization is different. Every ER has its own little nuances and its own little traditions and culture. And now you're in a completely different country. So that is also, I'm sure, very true. So I guess one of the questions that I'm just curious about is what has surprised you most, maybe about the ED flow, kind of that triage culture, or just operations in general versus what your experience has been in the US?
For me, I think the most surprising thing was I did expect it to be quite different. But like you said, a heart attack is a heart attack. It doesn't matter what country it happens in. And so it is a lot of the job is very, very similar. What I found, especially in New Zealand, which does not have medical malpractice, kind of tying that back up to the legal stuff, the pressure on documentation, particularly defensive documentation, just doesn't exist here in New Zealand. And so I feel that that gives clinicians, doctors, nurses alike, a bit more free reign or allowance, if you will, to document accurately what happened. Because I think a lot of times, so many of us clinicians, we're worried about, we know the likelihood that at some point in our career, somebody in risk, legal, what have you, will be reading the charts. And so we document accordingly. We document for an audience, right? In the States. And how in New Zealand, it's not necessarily for that. In New Zealand, we're documenting for continuity of care. So I have found that to be very different. The other thing, in my current facility, they mostly do electronic medical records, but it's not like Epic or Cerner. It's technically electronic. I mean, it's on a computer, but you're typing everything out. It's all narrative. So there's not clicking and all of that we're kind of used to by now with Cerner and Epic. Overall, emergency nursing, at 2 a.m. kind of looks the same, whether you're in California or Wellington, New Zealand. Another big thing was kind of how adaptable the nurses in New Zealand can be. And I think this is true for the States too, though, in rural places, how adaptable clinicians can be with fewer resources. So that's not necessarily just a New Zealand thing. I think that can go, facility to facility, depending on what resources are available, and kind of having to be a steward with what resources we're using. I will say, I feel like I almost kind of had to learn a new language. We talked about medication name changes. Tylenol doesn't exist over here, it's paracetamol. But I also had to learn new words. They don't call them beds or gurneys here, they call them trolleys. And to me, a trolley is like a cart that maybe you take at the grocery store. Well, no, patients are on trolleys here, but also your IV stuff is on a trolley. And also, yes, at the grocery store, you have a trolley. So everything's a trolley here, and I just get confused, and everything's a trolley. One thing that I did like about the kind of nomenclature here, everybody's familiar with AMA. Right. It's very legal, standardized, big deal kind of thing. They call it self-discharge here. So a patient doesn't leave against medical advice. A patient self-discharges, which I find very quaint, and it just paints a totally different picture. I mean, regardless of what the background of it is, maybe they had to go to childcare, or maybe they actually were belligerent and drunk. I don't know. But I found that nomenclature, kind of verbiage change, adjusts the mindset a bit when you're going through the patient history and you're seeing, oh, the patient self-discharged last night. Oh, and they're representing. Okay, let's see what happened here instead of left against medical advice. I feel that's so strong. But I found that interesting. It was tough. The accent also was tough. Apparently, I have a very strong American accent. Definitely did not know about. There were certainly some moments where I felt like I was speaking the language, but not speaking the language because they would just look at me like I had two heads sometimes.
Well, I will tell you, I do not think you have an accent, Marilyn. I can understand you very well. So, but that is funny, especially like at the trolleys and things like that. You know, you hear different words. When you said trolley, I immediately thought of like a streetcar on the hills of San Francisco or something like that. But yeah, it's interesting. Well, we have this question that we ask everybody, and you have worked in multiple areas of the world, multiple avenues of nursing. And I don't know if it's family, friends, maybe a patient interaction, but is there something when you look at your career and what you've done, is there something you look back and you go, wow, that really made a huge impact on me. That really changed my practice, or it really changed my direction or my focus in your career, a moment, a person, a time that really impacted you that you want to share?
I think that one experience that had a really big impact on me was, I'm sure most people listening are familiar with the fact that California has fires. We have wildfires, and I was working during the Tubbs fire in Northern California. I was in triage for, I think it was the whole first week during that fire. In that area, we had three hospitals with three emergency departments. Two of them closed, which left my emergency department open during this massive wildfire. And it was really a reminder to me and kind of a mind opening of how quickly normal systems can disappear. And so the things that we relied on every day, such as roads and cell phones for communication and just staffing plans and matrices and the resources available, and the fact that, oh, you have to go to a Pyxis or a medication cabinet to get things out, in an instant that can just disappear. During the fire, we had albuterol and inhalers and nebulizers just sitting out on the nurses station. Anybody could grab one, and they did, from patients to family members to nurses and doctors that were working there. None of us could breathe, so we're all sitting there puffing away on our inhalers while we're trying to provide patient care. Kind of mind opening to see all of these systems that we think are so rigid actually aren't. And what really stood out in the middle of all of that wasn't the chaos, it was the people. And I have so many stories, which I don't have time to go through, but I have so many stories of so many different interactions with people during those 2 weeks. We had doctors and nurses coming in saying, hey, how can I help? And we'd be like, no, we have enough workers at this point. We're probably fine. Go home. And they say, well, I don't have a home to go home to. So if it's all the same to you, well, I'll just stay and help out with fast track patients or something. Or, another patient who was very quiet and then started talking about how they were hiding with their partner in the pool in the backyard. And all that was poking out was their noses from the water as their house was burning down behind them. And then at one point, the patient looked over and their partner was floating. They had passed in the pool from smoke exposure. And so just those types of stories, that's what's really stuck with me. And that's what kind of, I think, gave me that spark to start looking more into systems instead of that narrow focus department type focus. Started looking a little bit more into just kind of overall systems after that. because we had to take 3 hospital worth of patients into one emergency department, and we had to do it with FEMA and with wildfire at our back door, not knowing if we were going to close as well or not. And it was mind opening, and it's interesting to just take a step back and realize what we think is so rigid and set in stone really isn't. And I think a lot of us experienced that a bit with COVID, some more than others, obviously, but things can adapt, things can change, and that's okay. We don't necessarily have to be so rigid against change, especially as emergency department nurses.
I think both Michael and I could follow up this with personal experiences of departments and situations that we have walked through in our career where everything you said was 100%, a million percent accurate, and where you are faced with whether it be like a natural disaster, whether it be plane explosion or so many chaotic events that happen, and you see what is normal become completely abnormal, but then it becomes normal very quickly. And the chaos, you can adapt to almost any variation of that and version of that as long as you're working with really strong people and really a strong team and communicating with one another and having a willingness to be present and say, like, okay, I know yesterday we were clocking in for our 12s and we're, doing it this way. And today that is not what we're doing, but I'm here because, you have my back, I have your back. We're going to take care of these patients. We're going to get people seen. Care is going to be done. And we're just going to make it happen. And that's where the beauty of the people that you work with just totally outshine oftentimes the incident. It's not that you forget,
Oh, yeah.
like I'm sure you'll never forget those wildfires. I'm sure you'll never forget that time of and that incident. But when I reflect on things like that, really it's the faces of people and patients that I remember. And I think it makes your career, your longevity in your career possible because I think most people, if they experience something that's just so heavy and so devastating, like how do you even ever move past that? And I'm like, well, it's the people. Like I'm going to show up tomorrow because my people are there. My team is there. Patients will be there. Like I have a responsibility. And so I don't know, there's something to that. So thank you for sharing that. And I can understand why while I'm sure it is, as you said, a very heavy topic and a very hard and challenging topic to discuss, there's healing, I think, that can happen for people. There's an isolation that often comes with experiencing those very difficult and heartbreaking moments in healthcare. It can feel very, very isolating. But when you hear people talk about it, it reminds you that there is hope. There is beauty to be found, even in the midst of chaos and destruction. I grew up, Mr. Rogers always was a big deal in my house in my household with my family. It was like one of the shows we were allowed to watch. So there's that. I follow his social media account on multiple channels. That being said, I get a lot of encouragement. But one thing he brought up is that when bad things would happen, his mom would always tell him, look for the helpers, look for the people that are trying to help. And that will give you hope. There are people out there who are doing good, even in the midst of tragedy. And I don't know, I feel like as emergency nurses, as healthcare professionals, like we are the good that people see when disaster strikes, when bad things happen. Like we have the opportunity to step up and be the good that people see. And man, what an honor. Again, thank you so much for sharing that. I am now going to just shift the whole focus of the podcast for a few minutes. We go deep, oh, sometimes heavy, and then I got to turn the corner real hard, real fast. So here we go.
That's what we do, right? Pivot.
Yep, pivot. So I'm going to ask some rapid fire questions, and we ask these just so we can get to know you a little bit better as a person. I mean, I feel like we've gotten a snapshot at your professional kind of portfolio, but now we're just going to ask you some fun questions. So, what would you be doing if you were not in your current role? So that could be a career, a job, something that you were like, I would have liked to have tried this. Maybe you still will. I don't know. What would it be?
Definitely writing. I love writing. Kind of do it professionally, but I one of the goals one day is to just sit down and write a novel. I really love writing. I love reading. And if I had the time and I didn't have three little ones running around and a full-time job in the expert work and all of those little extracurriculars I do, maybe one day it'll happen. But definitely writing.
I mean, what genre are we talking here? We're talking like fantasy, we're talking crime, we're talking mystery, we're talking what do we like we're or you're like, I have not put myself in a category yet. I don't pigeonhole me. Have you thought
No,
about it?
it would be fiction of some sort, but not off the wall like fantasy. While I love to read fantasy, I can't write it. That's probably why I love to read it.
I'll read almost anything. And I can't wait to ask you about books here in a second. So let's get there. I'm going to ask you about some of your favorites and let's follow up with what is your favorite book? Or it could be a quote that really inspires you, but I feel like you're going to come up with a book for me at least. I need at least one.
Oh yeah, it's a book. So, we're emergency nurses, right? So I had to come up with something slightly medical. House of God by Samuel, I think it's Samuel Shem. And if you have not heard of it, please do yourself a favor and go read it. But there's all sorts of wonderful little quotes that I could pull out of there. But one of my favorite quotes, and I think it's probably one of the ones that gets touted quite frequently, is at I think it goes at a cardiac arrest, the first procedure is to take your own pulse. And, at first blush, it's saying, in the middle of an emergency, settle yourself because you're the one that's supposed to be able to take care of emergencies. And that's how I took it initially. And then the older that I get and the more experience that I get, I think it's more of a kind of a leadership lesson rather than a clinical one. And saying that when things start to become chaotic, you really have to learn to become calm enough to think clearly before you can help anyone else. And if you ask newer nurses, how can you tell the more experienced nurses? They always say it's the calm one. And I
Mm.
think that's what Samuel was saying is check your pulse, settle yourself, center yourself, and then go take care of their emergency because it's not your emergency, it's theirs.
I love the saying that some people are thermometers and some people are thermostats. And so thermometer can tell you the temperature of the room, but the thermostat is the one who sets it. And so like who are you going to be? And I 100% agree with you. When I started out in emergency nursing and you would see people are falling out the ceiling tiles and they're just like, okay, let's help them get off the floor. And you're like, how are you not freaking out right now? And you would realize, like, this is not the first person they've seen fall out of the ceiling. Like, there's something to be said of, like, they're just like, yeah, we're just going to keep going. This too shall pass. And as you get a little further away from your start in your career, you realize, like, oh, okay, well, we'll get this handled too. These hours are going to pass by. The shift will be done eventually. Like that mindset, like things become tolerable that at one point would have just absolutely blown your mind. And now you're like, yep, seen this before. Like seen this before. You learn to kind of become the thermostat for that situation as opposed to letting it drive your reaction. I love that. I really like that thought. And thanks for sharing that. Okay. Favorite movie, TV show, or binge-worthy series? I'm very interested in what you're watching on TV, honestly, because like New Zealand, I don't know how that works. I still got questions.
And I still have Netflix. Um, but if you're gonna ask me favorite, I don't even know if it's still on anymore or not, but it'd have to be Scandal because forget about the politics because we don't talk politics, right? It's mostly I love it because Olivia Pope, she spends so much of her time trying to figure out what really happened when she's got people from all over saying different little stories and they don't quite fit the facts. I identify with that so much as an ED nurse and as an expert because you have a patient saying one thing and then they tell the doctor this, but they told you that. And then you have a family member calling, say, actually, no, this is what happened. And so I feel kind of like the medical Olivia Pope sometimes.
Sometimes I think that's why I like some of like the murder mysteries, the whodunits so much because I feel like you're getting like little snippets of information and putting it all together to kind of be like, oh, now I know who did it. Yeah, that's kind of what we're doing. You tell me
What we
one
did.
thing. Your labs tell me something else. Your vitals tell me
Tell
something
me
else. Your
something else.
family members tattling in the background. The nurse tech just told me that when she was in there, she heard the phone call.
Yes.
Ooh, and you're kind of figuring it all out. And so
Basically.
maybe that's the genre you're going to end up in because that's kind of what we're doing in our careers. Little snippets, little clues along the way. Well, thanks for sharing that. Okay, favorite song, musical artist, something that can just kind of instantly move you, change your mood, lift you up, get you going.
I think I would have to say Alejandra Guzman, kind of off the wall answer for Southern girl from a town of 600 people. I actually moved to Mexico for 2 years for a brief moment in time while I was doing travel nursing and hung out there, learned Spanish and learned to embrace the Latino culture. And there's just something about Alejandra Guzman, any of her songs, love them. And actually, on my way home from work today, I found out that she just put out a new song. And so I was exhausted and it just, like you said, lifted me up. And so it made me feel good.
I love hearing other people's take on music and who they're listening to and what moves them because it's fascinating how you will say that and then someone in a whole nother country would be like, "Oh, that's exactly correct." So I love the connection that comes with music. It spans a lot of miles when it brings people together. So love that. Thank you for sharing that. Okay. This one's kind of important because, like you said, you're doing a lot of things. You've got the family life, you've got the professional life, you got the legal life on the side, you've got this book that you're going to start writing, I feel like. So there's a lot of things happening. And you know, and I know that it takes a little bit of care directed towards oneself in order to continue to operate at such a high level and to continue to give, the best of yourself in all those avenues. So, what do you do for self-care? Or is there something that you do that helps you reset?
One thing that always helps me is getting out in nature. I'm very blessed that Wellington is very green and has lots of nature hikes around, and we have waterfront because we're on I mean, the entire country is an island, right? You're not far from the ocean at any point, but definitely walking around the waterfront, going for a hike. But I know for you all, it's starting to become summer. For us, it's almost winter. So it's starting to get colder, and I don't necessarily want to go out in the cold. So what I've started to do, and I call this my old lady phase, I'm starting to bake bread and crochet. And I did a little bit of reflection on why I'm doing this. And I think I'm doing it because as ED nurses, we spend so much time around chaos and just the unknown. It's nice to have hobbies where I can just slow down. I focus on one thing and then again, I see a result when I'm done.
Marilyn, you just doubled the length of this podcast by mentioning one
Sorry.
word, crochet. You don't know what you just opened up here. The can of worms has exploded.
We could sit on this because I am one of those people that you're correct. The summer is here. So I am like a butterfly out of a cocoon because I am not a cold person at all. That being said, when spring, summer hits, I'm like, okay, so what am I going to try this season? And yes, you have latched onto one of them that I am gonna get into the crochet world. And so I have so many questions. We're going to end the podcast, but I am definitely going to follow up and be like, okay, so what's the best tutorial? Somebody was telling me that, like, oh, you need to make sure that you get appropriate crochet hooks. They talk about ergonomics. Girl, I don't know what I'm getting into, but I am ready. And this will
Just jump
be
in.
but yes, I am wholeheartedly in. And when this podcast airs, hopefully I will have at least purchased the appropriate crochet hooks. But I'm one of those people that I'm willing to try a lot of things. I'm hoping I'll be good at it, but at the very least, I will produce some type of crochet artwork slash wearable item. Somebody was like, maybe just shoot for a coaster. I was like, that's fine too. But I'm gonna start and, whether it's crocheting, whether it's reading a good book, whether it's going for a hike, whether it's going to the gym, doing like whatever that might be. Resetting looks different for different people, But I also like to tell people, like, look, if you haven't quite found what's helpful to you yet, there are so many things for you to get out there and try. Like, I've tried many things that I don't keep up with, but I think there's something about continuing to pursue and to continue to try to find those things that help you grow as a person and pique your interest, grow your curiosity. Maybe you develop a new skill. I don't know. Maybe you don't. But I think there's something to be said of professionals who then go outside of that realm a bit and realize you got to stretch your humanity a little bit. So thank you for
But
sharing that. Thank you for sharing that. And also for the upcoming tips that's gonna be on this episode. We might have to do a crocheting with Marilyn episode, but
that's tutorial.
yeah, not above it. That's,
No offense, but I'll skip out on that one.
you know what though, Michael?
I don't know. I made a pretty cool beanie though.
See? A beanie. Michael, beanie. Yeah, it gets cold up North Louisiana. Beanie. Okay.
I don't think you want the purse. That's what I've made so far.
Options. So many options. Okay. All right. Well, let's just leave the hook because I'm sure that there are people who would want to reach out to you. What if there is there social media or some way that people could reach out to you if they wanted to connect with you, Marilyn?
The easiest place is definitely LinkedIn. That's where I connect with the majority of nurses and educators and just overall healthcare and legal professionals. And I really like kind of sharing information on there and learning about the professional, sometimes informal, non-professional hobbies of other people.
I love that. Well, I will put the information in the blog for this episode. So thanks again for sharing that.
Yeah, it's been great chatting with you, Marilyn, and getting to know you more. And, as I said, I've been connected with you on LinkedIn for a while, and I see your posts. You share a lot of great information, and, I certainly have enjoyed getting to know you a little bit more today and hear more about your career. I think it's fascinating that you've been all over the world and speak different languages, but getting to do the different things that you've done and not only to grow your personal profession but also to share a lot of that with other people so that they can grow and they can improve their departments or they can improve their documentation or whatever it is. I just think it's very admirable. So thank you for taking the time with us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. I very much enjoyed it.
We appreciate you staying up after your shift and then to the morning time with us. And we are closing down our day, but it's great. I love the great intersect and the connection. So many thanks to Marilyn for joining us for this episode of BCN and Friends. Marilyn, thank you for sharing your nursing journey, for walking us through kind of those innovative approaches to the ED flow. You've gifted us with lots of practical, real-world guidance on documentation that protects both patients and clinicians. We're grateful for your expertise and insight, and we hope this conversation leaves our listeners feeling inspired to rethink their current processes and empowered to make meaningful improvements in their own practice. That's a wrap for this episode of BC and Friends. Don't miss what's next. You can subscribe, share, and join the conversation by scanning the QR code for Learn updates in this episode blog. If you've got a topic you'd like us to cover, drop us a line at bcn@bcn.org. I'm Holly Briggs with Michael Dexter, and we're proud to celebrate your dedication to nursing across the emergency spectrum. Until next time, stay curious, stay connected. We are out.